Hello and welcome everyone. We're really glad to have you here today for the next session in our series Day One and Beyond, which is taking you through a different series of topics and activities related to building out on Oracle Cloud. For anyone who might be new to these events, welcome. We are hosted on Cloud Customer Connect, which is our Oracle community forum for end users. We should have a poll on the screen. Dennis, if you can have the first poll on the screen. Just to get an understanding of everyone's level of experience with Oracle Cloud Infrastructure or Oracle in general. This helps us in customizing our content for the upcoming sessions, so would really appreciate if you would take a second to respond to this poll. This session is being recorded and you'll be able to find the recordings on Cloud Customer Connect. You can also find the recordings and slide deck PDFs of our previous sessions there. I'm Renu Bhatt, a TPM with Customer Enablement Team, and today I'm joined by Anand Prasad, Cloud Architect here at Oracle, Lynn Lewis, Senior Cloud Engineer, and Joey Hall, also a Cloud Engineer. Joining us as an OCI expert today is Jason Cook, and he is Master Principal Cloud Architect. Like always, a quick reminder to use the Q&A box down at the bottom of the screen for any questions throughout the session. Please do not use chat for questions. Today, we are going to walk through the Oracle recommended OCI best practices and how to use those practices to your advantage when working on OCI. So Anand, let's dive in.
Thank you. Thank you, Renu. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. So today's agenda, what we are going to cover today is what are the best practices? And particularly I'm going to focus on cloud native solutions. And I think my colleague Lynn is going to talk about multi-cloud. And then I think we'll show in between a quick demo, how to take advantage of the best practices, OCI recommends and everything. And lastly, we close it up with the key results and key takeaways. So what are the objectives for this session from our point of view, from an Oracle point of view is, we always talk about what are the best practices in every cloud deployment. And those are we divide into the 4 different buckets. Different customers have different requirements. From a best practices perspective, we talk about security and compliance, reliability and resilience, performance and cost optimization, and operations efficiency, right? Now, given these 2 scenarios which we talk about, whether it's cloud native solution, which I'm going to talk about, or multi-cloud scenario / hybrid, which Lynn is going to talk about, we're going to touch upon these 4 topics so that you can take advantage of it for in your day-to-day life at your customer scenarios, as well as your deployments in OCI, okay? Now, what do I mean by best practices, right? This is everybody talks about best practices in everything they do, right? As I talked about, OCI recommends you from a 4 buckets perspective. Security is very, very close to OCI. We think about security from the grounds up. We design every product in the platform from the security in mind. And then, cost optimization is other big thing in cloud deployments. A lot of people have a misnomer that cloud is cheap. Whether it is sizing options of a compute, storage needs, or your even egress, networking, everything. Cloud is not cheap unless you manage it very, very well. What are the best practices? How can you manage your cost of your workloads deployment in OCI? And the other 2, operation efficiency and reliability, or often comes in hand in hand, what are the SLAs you have for your customers or your end users, what is an uptime, what is an RPO and RTO if something goes down, and then how much resilient your application is hosted on OCI, okay? So we cover into these 4 buckets, right? Generally speaking, any workload you want to bring it in. I'm going to talk about a scenario, which I think we take it as a cooking show, and then I'm going to walk you through that example. Before I do this, I'm going to ask you an expert here on the call, Jason, from your experience, can you comment on the best practices from these 4 buckets which I talked about?
Yeah, absolutely. As customers are considering moving workloads to OCI, or maybe your company is already there and you're just kind of getting up to speed with what can I do to make sure that I'm following best practices, I generally guide my customers to several services. The first 2 that I'd recommend getting familiar with that are foundational to anything you're doing in OCI is compartments and cost analysis. Now, these 2 services are going to allow you to protect your workloads and track your spends. With compartments, you're going to be able to organize, separate, and grant access to all your resources. Think How do I separate my prod and dev resources? And how do I grant access to each one of those? With that use case scenario, compartments are going to enable you to say, give your developers full admin access to a low environment so they can code, development, experiment with new services, new workloads. And as you look at what can I do in prod to secure that, right? Compartments are going to be with IAM the ability so you can lock it down. So maybe that same developer group can only do read access to production. Right. You can also look at compartment as a way of doing blast radius isolation between your different product teams, right? Maybe I don't want my supply chain group implementing a set of changes that could potentially impact finance, HR, or another group. And so compartments are going to be able to give you that, granular access to split up between prod and dev, but also give you access to split up workloads between, say, supply chain and HR, so you can't impact each other. Cost analysis is the other tool I think is a good one to start with from a foundation standpoint. And this is going to allow you to visualize your OCI spend across all your environments. It's a quick way you can jump in the console. You can run some reports to pull out, what am I spending by compartment? What am I spending by resources? Think servers or storage or databases. Or what am I spending by maybe a specific tag that I'm interested in that I've put across all my resources? The other nice thing about cost analysis is once you've figured out the filters and groupings and gotten the visualization you want, you can download it, and if you're one of those people that are, good at Excel, you can continue doing analytics in Excel or other tools that help drive out some of your FinOps activities. And that's generally what I'd start. There's a wide range of foundational services, but compartments and cost analysis are really good places to start.
Great. Thank you, Jason. I think I'm excited to cover the 4 different buckets as you talked about it, right? Compartments and a cost analysis. I'm going to walk the audience into a journey of cloud native. So let me set a stage here, right? I want the audience to imagine something like, I'm a typical on-prem customer, like, been there for many, many years. We decided as an executive management to move into cloud, and we have deployed our workloads straight lift and shift. We deployed from our on-prem world to the cloud. And we are right now in OCI. And the fictitious company we use it is like Vision Corp. Think about that. We have deployed all those things like, from an on-prem world, and we brought it into the cloud side of the fence in the OCI. Now, what I'm going to talk about is in the next 10 minutes is, what are the things which OCI provides you from the tooling perspective, from the capabilities perspective to modernize? And how can we tie up with that with the best practices, which I think Jason and I talked about it, right? Whether it's from a security perspective, whether it's from the cost analysis, resilience, as well as reliability, okay? Before we deploy any application, the fundamental thing is the application design principles. Like, you agree with me, I'm from a development background, and I always think about it from a development angle. What are the things if I want to design something, deploy something, or even develop something, right? What are the design principles I use it, right? It has to be lightweight, open source. Right now is everybody is moving towards that, and then it has to be, we have to automate the build test, like, for a pipeline to be built in. Like, how do you make sure, like, the SLAs we can provide to an end users, we be very proactive in terms of end-to-end monitoring, whether it's from the infrastructure layer to the application layer, how can we monitor end-to-end, and how can we have a single pane of window, right? We make sure that everything is working perfectly. And last but the least, like, we don't want to have a single point of failures at any point of time in our application development or application deployment area, right? Whether it is like, our data tier, whether it is our application tier, as well as web tiers, right? We don't want to have any single point of failures, right? So from the design principles, we want to provide you the best practices in terms of, like, think about it like what Jason talked about is compartments, right? You want to isolate from security perspective. The compartments gives you an advantage. Like, you can isolate your very, very critical deployments in a particular compartment, lock it in on a policy so that very few people can access that. And the application which is accessing it from that compartment is provided based on, like, your security policies and firewall rules, et cetera, et cetera. Now, as I talked about it earlier, right? Like, we are already in the cloud. Now, how can we take advantage of OCI tooling as well as capability to modernize that application, whether I'm going to make sure they change the application or start from a scratch and build it in which I'll call it cloud native. And something which comes into the discussion here is microservices architecture, like, API management. Today's in this world, everybody is moving towards microservices architecture. It's much easier to develop it. It's a lot of, like, sprints-based cycles, like, shorter development, like, you might have heard about it, like, fail fast. like, be quick and fail fast, so that we want to make development is faster life cycle, so that we can develop a lot of things. And then we can make sure that it is accessible from an API driven architecture, so that API management. And other side of the fence is like, everything is data driven today, right? Whether you want go into the AI ML, or even like, data sciences. And lastly, tie it up with everything end-to-end monitoring. How do you monitor all those? Your workloads on OCI is very, very critical from a best practices perspective. If you want to make sure reliability and resilience, and then you want to take care of it, monitoring plays a very, very critical like piece of it. Okay. Now, I'm going to touch upon it and then bring in Jason to talk about it. What takes effort, like in terms of microservices architecture, right? What are the things which Jason can comment on from his industry-based experience? Jason, do you want to add anything from a microservices architecture?
Yeah, no, and I kind of want to follow up what you're talking about in the last slide with scale and resiliency, because there's a ton of things that we could recommend on how do you build out a microservice, but it'd go well beyond the time we've got today. So just name two in that kind of that same theme of scale and resiliency. I would offer, when you're planning out how to build your microservice, I'd recommend using cloud native services to offload common tasks from your microservices. For example, I would recommend using our API gateway service to take care of authentication, logging, resource throttling, and protection from bad actors. What that's going to give you the ability to do is offload that to a service that can scale infinitely, and make sure that your developers don't have to build the authentication, logging, and throttling at each layer of their microservice. And they can focus more time on just the features and enhancements that they want to develop versus those common features that can come up to, one single platform like API Gateway. The second one I think I'd say is kind of building off your theme you're talking about resiliency, is decentralize your data management. As you're planning out, where are my data stores, where are my databases, I would try to avoid the old traps of building things very monolithic, right? Don't put all your microservices with a common database if they don't need to. Don't use a single object store. Be able to decentralize that out, whether that's obviously prod and dev should use different data stores, but also back to my earlier example, supply chain team needs their own data stores versus HR and finance. And what that's going to give you is blast radius isolation, right? If there is planned or unplanned changes in any of those areas, it's going to avoid taking out your entire, application, environment, and you're going to be able to, roll with, any kind of upgrades and maintenance is a lot easier if you kind of break apart where you have all your data stores at.
Perfect. Now, that leads into my next slide, which I'm going to talk about, what are the, tooling the OCI provides from a cloud native perspective. So the application is already on the OCI, and certain recommendations from a cloud native perspective came in, how can we make sure we have a flexible load balancer? And I'm going to touch upon each of this, how can you have a web tier with the OKE is nothing but Kubernetes auto scaling. Last but the least, how can I modernize with autonomous database, which is our industry leading database offering from an Oracle perspective, right? Now, these are the bells and whistles. We want to bring it in the cloud native perspective, because flexible load balancer really, really helps. You don't have to think about what will be my workload on 15th of the month. What will be the workload on number of requests on the 30th of the month, right? Depends upon the cycle, number of requests coming in. The flexible load balancer handles it automatically. So you don't have to, you pay for your use and you don't have to guess. Right? It's a big thing in the cloud, right? You pay for your use and you take away completely the guessing of a sizing option. Again, cost optimization, tying up with the best practices like cost optimization performance is key, right? The auto scaling portion of it really provides you the performance of it. As you scale horizontally, right? It helps you to scale to meet your customer needs and customer demands on particular, use cases or particular, cycle of the month, right? Depend upon your business needs, right? Last but the least, the industry leading autonomous, again, ties up with the best practices, security is built into the autonomous, it is completely, locks you down from a security perspective, from scaling perspective, from a cost optimization perspective, resilience and reliance. All those things are built into autonomous database from the ground up, right? That's our industry leading database. We encourage you to modernize with these three options when you do a lift and shift from an on-prem world to the cloud. Now, I'm just going to take an example here, right? Now, think about this microservices, the application we brought in from an on-prem world. We want to modernize it. I've been talking about that. Like, and how can we modernize this? Like, I want to build different microservices based on my business needs, right? One of the microservices I want to build is for my project management. The second one I want to build about it for my financial data. This third one I want to build it from a media. Like, and if you look at it from a right-hand side, all of this is a microservices, which is a backend, is a containerized applications and deployed in the Kubernetes, right? Now, what does OCI provide you from a Kubernetes standpoint of view, from a containerized perspective, from a CI/CD pipeline? I'm going to talk about that in the next slide so that you can cover, and then also bring in Jason to talk about what are the challenges in maintaining the Kubernetes side of the fence. Now, this view provides you a typical view about, from an OCI perspective, the tooling and end-to-end life cycle of developing a containerized applications. As you can see, right, OCI does provide you the state-of-the-art, the latest and greatest Kubernetes cluster. It's a managed service. Like, I'm going to talk about other options as well in the later slides. Like, CI/CD pipeline, you can automate your complete pipeline from the development to the deployment to the monitoring, etc. And the last but the least, like, how do you make sure that, the master node is managed by OCI, and then, like, the worker nodes, you have the complete capability to manage yourself from a governance perspective, right? Again, operation efficiency, they're tying up with the best practices. Like, we provide you the operation efficiency for maintaining the operations of managing the Kubernetes is really is resource intensive, right? A typical view of, like, complete CI/CD pipeline. Okay. Now, if you look at it, like, Oracle integrates with a lot of open source tools. You can easily use any of your open source tools if you have for a CI/CD pipeline as well. But the gist of the message here on this slide is, what I want to take from my best practices is, OCI does provide you, takes away a headache of, like, managing the Kubernetes. It provides the managed Kubernetes service. If you ask a question, like, what is the most pain point for, like, for like, managing a containerized application is, operations remains the top challenge, right? Day-to-day operations, it requires a lot of advanced skills, large scale requirement and complexity, and the cost, added responsibilities from an operations perspective, right? The security and compliance requirements, all those things, like, you can see, OCI provides you, simplifies the Kubernetes operations at scale. What we provide you is a layer of abstraction by hiding the underlying infrastructure details, and you can take care of automation. You can deploy your workloads easily and take care of the next generation infrastructure OCI is providing. Let me ask, like, from an expert advice from Jason is like an industry, the services architect, and he provides the expert on. Jason, from your experience, like, what are the challenges when bringing in a cloud native and microservices services into Kubernetes? What do you think, like, we can help the customers from best practices perspective?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's something I've seen out in here recently, talking with customers here in the past couple of months. I mean, Kubernetes is becoming the de facto standard for containerization. But Anand, as you mentioned, there's a lot of operational overhead, especially with the first workload you put in Kubernetes. So I can say this, when I'm out in the field with customers, especially ones that are new to Kubernetes or even just new to OKE on our platform, I start small. And what I mean by that is I kind of step my customers into how to deploy OKE. And within our service, we've got a couple different options of how you can deploy. And the first way I start with services, I use our quick create process. And what the quick create process will do is it'll take care of all the undifferentiated heavy lifting of spinning up the network, the firewalls, the load balancers, and get you to the point where you've got an OKE cluster that you can immediately start working with within an hour, right? You can connect to the endpoint, you can deploy workloads, you can start, experimenting with how it scales. And that's usually a day to get everybody's kind of heads wrapped around how it works on our platform. Generally, the next thing I'll do after that is we'll use the next service, which is a custom create. And what that allows me to do with customers is deploy an OKE environment on your existing network, or to build a new one that will comply with whatever your organization's network policies are. It will, deploy across existing load balancers, and we can start looking at real workloads, real environments that you want to put on OKE. And this will be something we do in a couple of days, but this will help us understand the operations. It'll start helping us understand the infrastructure layout that goes into building an OKE environment. After we've mastered that, and that's generally a process that takes a week or so, we'll get into how do I deploy OKE with your code pipelines. Now, Oracle provides a lot of examples to help you in this space, right? We provide Terraform scripts that allow you to create what I call a vanilla OKE environment that'll kind of jumpstart how can I put this in my code pipeline. We have processes and examples that you can use via our resource manager. And I think Joey's going to get into a little bit of demo to show how that works today. And again, the whole idea is we're trying to give you a jump start into being able to deploy OKE and doing it different ways so you don't have to kind of take a bite of the whole elephant all at once. That's generally how I walk customers through it.
Perfect. I think this leads into the next discussion, where I think I don't take much time from Joey showcasing an e-commerce application. I don't want to steal a lot of his slides. Like, Len, if you move into the next slide. One of the things, like, what we are talking about is bells and whistles of deploying a cloud native application, whether you are building it from scratch or you're modernizing it. The key thing is, like, what the cloud provides you at OCI is the bells and whistles for you to monitor them from the best practices. Like, you have to have a monitoring is a key thing on the cloud side of the fence. Like, how do you want to get notified when certain SLAs are broken? Like, certain metrics are overcrossed, like, whether it's CPU usage, whether it is like, number of requests coming in. So, and last but the least, like, you can aggregate everything and from a logging perspective into a single place, and then see a dashboard in one common one single pane of window to take necessary actions, right? I want to talk about, like, like I touched upon a lot of aspects of cloud native applications. I want to touch upon quickly about how do you deploy a cloud native application in OCI, and then I'll hand over to Joey to showcase a compelling demo. So one of the things what OCI offers you is, like, automation is built from grounds up into our platform. We provide you a tooling, like, I think Jason talked about it, Terraform. Terraform is an industry-leading language for automation right now for infrastructure as a code, okay? Now, if you want to do that, like what OCI provides you is a resource manager, which is nothing but a managed Terraform service. What you can do is you can take your existing Terraform, you can bring it into the resource manager, and resource manager takes care of it. All of your headaches which you used to have as standalone Terraform, whether it's managing statefall, managing the drift, etc., etc. In this example, the application which Joey is going to talk about, we have used the resource manager to deploy that application into the OCI. Again, consistency, like resiliency and reliability is key when you deploy something. You want to make sure the deployment is consistent if you deploy even 100 times, and then resource manager provides you that. It doesn't maintains the drift if somebody goes and manually changes it after you deployed it, as well as it manages the security angle. Who has an access to resource manager can also be managed from an identity and access management using policies. Okay. I don't want to take away much thunder from Joey. I'll stop here and I'll hand over to Joey to showcase how we have built up a simple e-commerce application using the cloud native. Again, everything what I talked about it from a containerized application, Kubernetes and everything, and let him walk over through it. Joey, it's all yours.
Thank you, Anand. All right. So as Anand mentioned, what we have here is we're showing a microservice-based e-commerce application that's utilizing a lot of the cloud native services that Anand just went over in the presentation today. And you can see this is a simple web application. We are looking at basically your one-stop shop for all of your cat's needs. So all of your auto feeders, pet food, grooming tools, all of that stuff. So you could go through, add items to a cart, shop, basic e-commerce application. And what we're going to do is look at how could we deploy something like this, utilizing a couple of the tools that Anand went over to make your life more operationally efficient and leverage a variety of other services that you can see here to help you get familiar with working with cloud workloads. So here for this particular application, we're going to use a lot of different services. And luckily, we're going to be using a Terraform script through Resource Manager to make this a lot easier to deploy. And you can do this with many different services that we have. There's templates for, and there's also our Oracle Architecture Center, which I'll show you in a second, to do this with a lot of different types of deployments. But you have things like the API Gateway, which Jason mentioned, Oracle Container Engine for Kubernetes that we'll look at, different monitoring tools, Resource Manager to automate this infrastructure deployment for us. So we'll take a look at some of that in the OCI tenancy. And then here just gives you a better look at those services within the diagram and how some of this stuff connects to help our application run here. So if we go into the tenancy, here's the OCI homepage if you're not familiar with it yet, but we will hop right into developer services. So top left menu, down into developer services, we'll go straight into Resource Manager. And Resource Manager is your infrastructure as code as a service. So it helps you manage those Terraform deployments You can do these in a variety of different ways. So there are the templates that we're going to go over. You could do it based off of an existing compartment. If you'd like to duplicate an environment, for example, it can create a Terraform script of that compartment, and then you could apply that through Resource Manager as well. And if you have your own Terraform files that you'd like to bring in, you also have the ability to create a stack off of that. So pick your option, create a stack based off of that, plan it, apply it, and it will do the provisioning for you. So quickly looking at that, if we go into stacks here, you can see the stack that we already have that's active for that application that we're running. So that's our MuShop application. If we click on create stack, I can show you how we got to that. So here, this is if you wanted to upload a file, but you could also look at some of our templates here. So I could go in, select my template. Here are some quick starts that will change periodically. So you could choose some of these to get familiar with different OCI deployments. You could do it service-based, and you could also do it based off an existing architecture. So here you have a sample e-commerce application, basic. There's also an advanced one, which would be the microservice-based one. Select the template, and then it will configure all of that for you. So just give it a second to load. I have some details for that, the Terraform version. Could go next to select the database name that you're going to have for this particular deployment, and then you could confirm, make sure all of this is correct, and run the stack. So you would run that, could apply it, and then it could provision the resources for you. But that will take a little bit of time, so we're just going to look at what we have already provisioned for us. And one of the ways it's really useful to do that, to look at what's provisioned within any particular environment, is utilizing the Tenancy Explorer. So if I go into Governance and Administration, Tenancy Management, you go into Tenancy Explorer, I already have it open here, and we have this for our MuShop compartment. So this is the compartment that we ran that Resource Manager Terraform script for, and you can see all the different services and all the different portions of it that were provisioned with that script that we can take a look at. So I give you an idea of some of the stuff that's been provisioned. If we look into some of this stuff in a little bit more detail, let's look at our networking portion. So you can see that a virtual cloud network has been provisioned for us. You can see that we also have a load balancer that is there to route traffic to our instances. And then we can even look at our Kubernetes clusters. If we go to developer services again, see containers and artifacts, Kubernetes clusters. You can see that a cluster was created for us to run our application. We can take a look at the node pools. So you can see pool 1 was provisioned with 3 different nodes within, already and active. And if you wanted to, you could view metrics about the performance of any of these particular nodes if the status or anything changes for any particular reason. And with every service that you provision with OCI, they'll all have a metrics area that you could go through and view things like your CPU, memory, IO, all of that stuff, however it's related to that instance that you're working with. So we did this through Resource Manager. Well, it's nice as well. Let's say if you wanted to create something else, right? You could create a cluster from here, and we have the quick create option. So the Resource Manager Terraform script did the entire deployment for you. So across all the different services that were needed to run that application. Quick create, similar, but only for your Kubernetes cluster. So it'll provision certain resources that are pertinent to your Kubernetes deployment. So it'll do the virtual cloud network, the gateways associated with that, your cluster, and your nodes and node pool. So that's another way to make it a little bit easier to get started with some of these cloud native services through the quick create. There's also a similar way to do this with your virtual cloud network as well. But if you do want to customize this a little bit more, maybe you want to adjust some of those components or include or exclude some of those, you could do the custom create, and this would just be provisioning your Kubernetes cluster and its associated nodes here. So 2 different ways you could do that. And another area that you can leverage within OCI to help operationalize this a little more efficiently, see what's going on within your application, and take a look at some of the different details of how my, let's say, network communication is going and some of my security rules for that, is I could go into networking, and head over to the Network Command Center. So within the Network Command Center, there are a lot of different areas that you could take a look through to get a better idea of how things are communicating or performing within your network. But for now, we're just going to look at the network visualizer quickly. And this will give you a visual of your different networking components. You can drill into the routes. You could drill into the security firewalls. You could look at the inventory of what instances are provisioned within your network. So when you're working in a cloud environment, you will still want to be able to have that level of visibility so that you could see what's actually happening and how things are organized within your tenancy. So here's our network, the associated gateways. I could go and view security map or the routing map. If I go into the routing map, we'll be able to see the routes between the networks and the associated gateways. So you could see each of the subnets. So our virtual cloud network has been separated into 4 subnets that were provisioned with our Terraform script. We have internet gateway, NAT gateway, and a service gateway. And we could see at each of these. So this one is for API gateway. This public subnet has our load balancer. And in this private subnet, if we want to look at the cluster nodes, we can also do that through here by clicking on that subnet and viewing the inventory. And this should take us to the instances that are deployed or associated with that network. So you can see each of those instances, the state of each of them, and then you can hop into where we were before to look at the details and performance of that particular instance here. So those are just a couple tools that you could utilize to, one, automate your deployments to make it easier to recreate different environments, ways to get better visibility into how our instances are performing, as well as gain insights into our network architecture and what we have deployed within different environments with something like the Tenancy Explorer as well. And with that, I will hand it over to Lynn to take us through the second half of this presentation.
Thank you, Joey. So now we're going to talk about the next level of multi-cloud. The idea now is that you're in OCI and perhaps you want to use tools in someone else's cloud that you're used to, you just like better, and it's something that you want to do. In this case, we're going to use the example of where you've set up some things in OCI, Vision Corp, and now you want to use some productivity tools, you know, like Outlook 365 or whatever, directly in Azure. So the idea here is when you go there, you have more robust disaster recovery options. You have an easier migration from one cloud to another, to another, to another. You can use Terraform, change the variables. You keep the overall architecture. That's easier said than done, but changing the variables, that is, to fit the respective methodologies that the respective clouds have, but it's possible. And you also get good scalability and agility because you're not locked in to any particular location, and it gives you the ability to take advantage of pricing in different clouds that might be different, right? Or technologies that might be different in respective clouds. So in this example, you have Oracle and Microsoft, and you have Fast Connect and ExpressRoute as your connectivity, and that is required. In all the cases I know, not just with Azure, but with other clouds, you have to have the Fast Connect capability. And the reason for that is if you're going to be doing this, and you're going to be doing this at a with a federated user, so you're able to go back and forth from one to the other, or you can use your productivity tools in a virtual machine on OCI, or you can use an application in Azure that then goes and uses the autonomous database in Oracle. These are things you can do, but to do that, you want to make sure you have the right connectivity. So you have to have the best connectivity you can have, either ExpressRoute or both. You have to have both, and that's it shows that that's how you're really talking to each other here. No, you're talking to each other with the fiber that's in the same data center, dropped from one cage to another, but you also have to have the capability of talking to that respective cage from your router and talking to our respective cage from your router. So it's essential to be able to do that, because you want to have the low latency so that your users internally have that rapid response. And so your bits and bytes that are being transferred from one to the other, that's getting across. But the Samuel 2 identity and federation, that needs to be there for you as well. So the idea is you have the unified identity and access management, you have the collaborative support for workloads across the clouds, and you migrate and run mission critical enterprise workloads across the clouds. And it's not just Azure, there's those other guys as well. So here's a classic architecture that we've seen actual enterprises run. We didn't make this up, but you start off with Oracle Database Service for Microsoft Azure. Make sure everybody knows what we're doing and who you're doing it with. You have your users. Perhaps you originated in Azure Active Directory, and now you're sharing that information through OCI identity. And in OCI, you have your application, your autonomous database, your data services all in place. Over here, you have your tenancy subscription with Azure, where you might have your Win process or your web server or your application server combined with Elasticsearch, and perhaps an SQL database as well, talking back and forth. And in that way, you can still get everything together and get the right response for what you need. So it all comes down to, as Anand showed you, you're looking at the best practices. So for cost optimization and performance, that's up to you. Where are you going to put the virtual machine or the bare metal that you need for the right price? Where are you going to put your storage? How are you going to look at create the networking and tuning? And how are you going to do the cost management across multiple clouds? We can help you do that in OCI. Those other guys have their methodologies as well. It's not that different from one to the other. We all sort of settled on, there's only so many ways you can skin a cat. Security and compliance, we've already spoken to that. We have the identity management, Samuel 2 capability from one to the other. And you have your compute security, your database security, and your data protection. That's essential, as you know. And pretty much all of us now have data encryption at rest and in motion. So whether you're using a VPN, ISP VPN, or you're using a direct connect or one of the other services, you're going to be encrypted in motion. So it's up to you, working with us and our teams, to get the right deployment strategy that fits your requirements, to get the workload monitoring using things like, for us, O&M, I'll get it out, observability and management. And with that, I should mention that any of our cloud services with respect to data systems includes our enterprise manager system as well. So you get all the ability to look at logs, track logs, look at your efficiencies along those lines. And we provide a universally deployable management system. You have to put a management agent on the respective virtual machine or bare metal. You have to open the right ports, but then you can connect to our hub and we can give you a single pane of glass for your OS management wherever you're looking at with respect to your virtual machines or bare metal, and in particular Oracle databases. We have that operational capability as well. And that even looks at how good your SQL is from one time to the next. Reliability, and it sounds extensive. The only thing you're paying for is the storage of the information and a little bit of a data warehouse, autonomous data warehouse to store all the data in there, and then our analytics tool package. But you don't have to use that. You can use the data and use your own or somebody else's tool that you like as well. But there are methodologies to gain this operational insight into what your business is, whether it be on our cloud or on multiple clouds. It just takes some finesse. Reliability and resilience, of course. Everyone with the software-defined networks, everyone has an excellent fault-tolerant network architecture at this point. We provide you capabilities, the other guys do too, for service limits and quotas so you don't overspend once you've established what you want to spend. And then we have data backup at a variety of different levels and the ability to scale out and up as well as down if you're not using the data systems in particular anymore. So here's some of the training and certifications that are available to you. The live labs, which are excellent methodologies of going through recipes. If nothing else, go there and find a recipe for something that you're interested in doing. It will sort of lay it out for you, and then you can use it in your own tenancy, or you can apply for utilization in a tenancy right there. So these are methodologies for you to learn and grow and experiment without spending your money or spending very little of your money, depending upon how you're working. In addition to that, we make a lot of YouTube videos. Some of them are 5 minutes long on a new feature on a product, for example, or they can be, I think the longest I've ever seen is about an hour and a half on creating, what was that thing? Anyway, so we also have best practices resources as well as you have access to this day one and beyond recording off the day one and beyond website, and some of the other information will be there as well.
Before we turn in, Renu, I think if you can hold on 1 second. Yeah, I want Jason to comment on his expert. Like, Jason comes from an experience of multi-cloud vendor. I think, Jason, if you can take a moment and then comment on, like, what Lynn talked about, like in a multi-cloud perspective. What is your take on how can the customers in today's world, multi-cloud is norm now? People want to take advantage of, like, best of the breeds in each cloud, like, whether it's OCI, AWS, GCP, and Azure. What is your take and like, feedback or like recommendations for multi-cloud vendors on the customers?
Yeah. And Nod, I think you kind of gave me a head nod there as you're kind of talking about why is this important, and it is because you can take best of breeds. That's why it's important to all the customers, right? Everybody's looking at multiple clouds because they've got specialties that they're better than everybody else, right? Of course, we are very good at databases. It's not the only thing we're good at, but it's probably one of the most signature things. If you look at OCI, of course, they've got the Oracle database, and it's the best of the database classes. I could look to Azure and say they got O365, and nobody competes with them, honestly, with what they do with the productivity suite. And what the multi-cloud strategy does is it starts to set us a strategy that builds technologies like the interconnect. Now, the interconnect is important because that allows you to take your favorite services on Azure, your favorite services on OCI, and put them together as a seamless environment. And as Lynn was talking about, you've got that low latency connection that's highly redundant, that's basically just a fiber line from one cage to another. But it enables you as a customer to not have to put an entire environment on one side or the other. It allows you to take best in breed. It allows you to put it together in a way that's meaningful, highly resilient, very performant, and be able to have, kind of your cake and eat it too. And what you're going to see from Oracle is, we're going to continue building up this strategy with other cloud vendors, right? Right now, we're working with AWS to be able to, deploy our NoSQL HeatWave service to them. You're going to start seeing other network capabilities like we have with Azure with GCP. And so, this is both technologies that are, that you can use today, especially as we talk about the interconnect. It's a strategic direction that you can expect us to continue deploying out more types of services, but it's also an enabler for you as a customer to really use all the cloud vendors to your advantage to get the best of what you want out of each one.
Thank you, Jason. Renu, back to you now.
Thank you so much. Anand, Len, Joey, and Jason, if you could look at the Q&A, since we have some time now and want to expand on any question. I know that we have already answered all the questions, but is there something that you would like to highlight from the Q&A window?
I can comment that there's a few of them that I've heard commonly from my customers. One One of them, what I've heard very commonly, and I've talked to my peers about this, and it's something we hear from all our customers, is how do I find all my resources inside my tenancy? Or how do I just find my compute? Or how do I just find services that, are going to have some sort of maintenance? And there's a project out there that we don't probably talk about enough, especially for the OCI stuff. I can't speak as much to the SaaS side, but on the OCI side, there's a show OCI project that with about 5 minutes of your time to get set up, gives you an amazing amount of detail that you can start reporting on your environment. And I've come across this, my peers have come across this several times. And then as I look down the road on future services that are going to come out probably the end of this year that really got some of my customers excited, it's that workflow service. And this is one of the services I really think is, and I've had a chance to work on several of the clouds. I think this is an area that we've got a better service than everybody else. And the intent of this service is to give you a canvas-like experience, to put together workflows by dragging and dropping, almost like you're sitting in Visio, if you've got familiarity with that. So you can shut down entire environments and have custom scripts being run as they start back up again. Now, this is a little ways off in the development, and it's probably going to be into this year, but I've got a ton of customers that are super excited about this workflow service to address actually one of the questions spot on. How do I shut down my resources without having to maintain a code base? And that's what it's there for.
Jason, there is a question on where does Oracle stand vis-a-vis the competitors when it comes to cloud market. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, and I'll be honest with you. We're getting into that game just a little bit later than others. I've come from an Azure AWS world. If I go back a few years, and they've got pretty strong marketplace offerings, especially AWS. We're starting to build those services out. And although I'd love to tell you it's best in class, I'd say what we're doing now is building what I'd call a Gen 2 version of that marketplace and taking the lessons learned, kind of selflessly stealing from what the other cloud vendors have already figured out and putting that into our service day one. I'd say personally, I give that service some time. It's a good service. I'd keep an eye on it. And since we can kind of learn from what the other cloud vendors are doing, I think eventually it's going to be better than what they have. But our offering is still kind of new at the moment. You'll find things out there like Palo Alto firewalls and some of those common basic things you see in the other vendors. But it's something we probably still got a little more development time before it becomes world-class.
But Jason, what I would say is even though we started late, we learned from others' mistakes and we did not make those mistakes.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that's some of the advantage we have, especially as we talk about things like our network or, Marketplace is a good example. Although we weren't the first of the game, it gave us an opportunity to see what worked and did not work and build it in from day one.
Super. Awesome. Cool. Is there any other question? I mean, we still have some time. If anyone has any questions, please you can either put it in Q&A or in chat, and we can take your question live. Or Jason, if there's any other highlight you would like to add before we wrap up.
No, I mean, the only thing else I think I'd add out there is Lynn was right. We've got an amazing assortment of videos out there. If you're new to the cloud game or you're just not familiar with the OCI platform specifically, we've got a lot of good YouTube channels. They're free. I like that there's different, allotments of time. Sometimes, sitting through an hour reInvent video, although they're great from AWS, sometimes it's nice to have videos like 15, 20 minutes, 5. And we got a ton of those on various topics where maybe your routine meetings, maybe you just don't got a lot of time to sit there for an hour or two. Go through our Oracle Learning channel, and there is a ton of good videos out there about all the new services we have out there, as well as some of the foundational things that you just kind of have to know as you're deploying things out on OCI.
True. And Oracle University actually has a lot of content, foundation level content also on Oracle Cloud. And this is all free for everyone. So you can just go into any certification track, make use of the content, and you will have to pay for the exam if you are taking the exam. But most of the content is free for Oracle Cloud. So, and you can find the link in one of the links that I posted earlier in chat. It's also in Q&A. So go grab those links and learn about what Oracle Cloud can do. So with that, there are more questions. So Jason, does Oracle support access to OCA logs?
Probably OAC, Oracle Analytics Cloud logs, as I think Anil was talking about. Oh man, I wish I was more of an expert in this area. I generally have to rely on. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think what they're asking about is Oracle does not have access to your logs for your audit logs and things like that. You have to give them those logs. They'll sometimes ask for them and we don't have, if you have the observability and management product or using that, you can use most of that for free, but you do have to pay a use fee for logging analytics, which is that autonomous data warehouse or data lake where all that data is contained, just your data, and then the access to OAC tools to observe that data, to create the dashboards that you want and get a look at it. And is there any plan for a session like this for CD3? And not at this time. It's not for one day and beyond. Perhaps later in the year or beyond. We just haven't had the demand for it.
Super.
Oh, one last comment. I watch a lot of the videos. I've watched a lot of the training over the last 5 years, and my recommendation is to push it up to about 1.75 and keep your X on, and then keep your hand on the toggle, so when you need to stop it, you can stop it, because otherwise it just takes forever.
True. Totally agree. Awesome. Great session, everyone. I mean, really loved how Anand, Joey, Len, and Jason got into the dialogue mode and discussed a lot of things and shared a lot of best practices. Really appreciate your time and help with the session, Anand, Joey, Len, and Jason. I hope everyone enjoyed the session and learned something new today. Now it's time for 2 quick polls. Dennis, if you're there, for the first one, please let us know how we're doing. We need your feedback to continue improving our session. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to recommend this webinar to your colleagues and friends? Please remember that your feedback is very important to us. So we really need that kind of motivation from you guys. So let us know how we did. And then we can move on to the next poll. I know there were some topics about some questions about more topics in Devon and beyond. So if you would take a moment to answer another poll to let us know what kind of topics you would like us to cover in this series. So select the topics that you're most interested in, so we can add sessions on new topics based on your feedback. I have also put 2 links. One is the Devon and Beyond link. You can go there to register for other upcoming sessions. We are adding more sessions to this series. So maybe you should bookmark that and keep coming back to see what new offerings we are adding. And then there is this personaltrainers_us@oracle.com. So if you have any questions on training, on cloud, send it us on that email address. There is a whole team watching that alias. So if you have questions, use that alias to send it across. With that, I would like to thank you. Thank you to join the session today. Look forward to see you again on April 4th. And the topic on April 4th will be networking. You can find the details on the same page, the Devon and Beyond link that I've shared there. Thanks again for joining, and have a great day, everyone.